The meeting hall of the Galaxy Council was the largest room in known space. That was not an exaggeration. It had been built that way on purpose, so that every species who walked through its doors would feel small. The ceiling stretched so high that the upper galleries were hidden in a soft, artificial haze. The floor was made of dark stone shipped from 7 different worlds. Every seat at the great circular table was carved from the native wood or metal of the species it belonged to. It was a beautiful room. It was also a very arrogant one. Daiho walked into the hall with the calm confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times. He was the chief ambassador of the Velcorian people, and he carried himself like it. His robes were pressed. His posture was straight. He nodded to a few familiar faces as he moved toward his seat, exchanging the small pleasantries that diplomats exchange when they do not actually care about the answers. He sat down and looked around the table. 46 species were represented. Every seat had someone in it. Every seat, that is, except one, the human seat. It sat directly across from the Velcorian section. It was a simple chair, made of dark wood, with no carvings, no decoration, no symbols of pride. Humans had always been like that. Plain, quiet, practical. The chair had been empty for 17 years. Most of the ambassadors had stopped noticing it. Daiho certainly had. It was just part of the furniture now. A young aide named Soha appeared at his shoulder and placed a datapad quietly on the table in front of him. She was one of the junior analysts on his staff, recently promoted, still carrying that nervous energy that new staff always had. She was good at her job, though. Careful. She noticed things. "The border sector vote is 3rd on the agenda today," she said quietly. Daiho nodded without looking up. "Good. It should pass easily." Soha hesitated. She had a habit of hesitating before she said something she wasn't sure she should say. Daiho had noticed this about her. He both appreciated it and found it mildly irritating. "The sectors being voted on," she said, "were previously under human patrol coverage." "Yes," Daiho said, still not looking up, "which is why we need to reassign them. I only meant there's quite a lot of territory. 11 sectors. The combined patrol responsibility would be significant for whoever takes it on." Daiho finally looked at her. "The Theros have already volunteered for 3 sectors. The Dorvani will take 2. We'll split the rest among 4 other species. It's already arranged." He looked back at his pad. "It's fine, Soha." She nodded and stepped back. But she did not look entirely satisfied. She rarely did, and Daiho had learned to move past it. The session opened on schedule. The council speaker, a tall, thin-limbed creature from the Novel system, called the assembly to order with the traditional 3-tone chime. Business proceeded in the way it always did, slowly, carefully, with a great deal of talking about things that had mostly already been decided before anyone sat down. The border sector vote came and went in under 10 minutes. It passed without a single objection. The human-patrolled sectors were formally divided among 6 other species, logged, stamped, and moved on from. Nobody spoke about the humans. Nobody mentioned the empty chair. The session moved to agricultural trade disputes and didn't look back. Daiho thought nothing more of it. Far away from the council hall, so far that light itself took weeks to make the journey, a cargo freighter called the Baiko moved through open space in near total silence. Its hull was old but clean. Its engines were well maintained. It carried medical supplies, agricultural equipment, and 3 crates of a food product that had no name in any alien language because no alien had ever tried it. The captain of the Baeko was a woman named Yuna. She was not young, not old. She had short hair and careful eyes and the kind of hands that had fixed more things than they could count. She sat at her navigation console and looked at the route map in front of her with a blank expression that people who didn't know her might have mistaken for boredom. She was not bored. She was thinking. The standard route would take her through council-monitored shipping lanes, the same lanes she had used for the first 12 years of her career. They were well-mapped, well-lit, and reliably safe. They were also, as of 6 years ago, no longer somewhere she chose to go. She plotted a different course. It was longer. It passed through 2 uncharted drift zones and 1 region that the council's navigation chart still labeled as unstable. Yuna had crossed it 4 times now. It wasn't unstable, it just hadn't been studied by anyone the council trusted. She filed no report about her rerouting. She sent no notification to the shipping authority. She did not, in fact, communicate with any council-affiliated body at all. She had not done so in a very long time. Her first mate, a quiet young man named Giwan, leaned over from the adjacent console. "We're adding 9 days to the run." "I know," Yuna said. "The client won't be happy." "The client will be fine. I'll send them a message." Giwan looked at the new route on the screen, then looked at her. "You think the council will notice we're not logging through their lanes?" Yuna glanced at him with something that was almost a smile. "No," she said simply. "They won't." She turned back to her console and entered the final coordinates. The Beko adjusted its heading without complaint, its old engines humming steady and low, and slipped away from the monitored lanes into open, quiet dark. Back on Orion Station, long after the session had ended, Soa sat alone in her small office with a data screen full of numbers. She had requested a routine infrastructure report, just a background check, something she had been quietly curious about for weeks. The report had come back earlier that afternoon, and she hadn't been able to stop reading it since. 342. That was the number. 342 active council systems, communications relays, medical protocols, gate calibration software, emergency response networks that had been originally built, written, or maintained by humans. All of them still running. All of them running on old human work that no one had touched since the day humanity went quiet. Soa sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a long time. Nobody had ever counted this before, or if they had, nobody had said it out loud. The number sat there on her screen, patient and heavy. Like a stone that had been sitting underwater so long that nobody remembered dropping it. She thought about the empty chair at the big table. She thought about how quickly the vote had passed. 11 sectors done in 10 minutes. She saved the report, locked her screen, and sat in the quiet for a while longer. Outside her window, the stars did not move, but somewhere out among them, very far away, a freighter with old engines and careful eyes slipped off the map without a sound. The first thing that failed was a light, not a metaphorical light, an actual one. A communications relay in Sector 7, a small box-shaped station that had been bolted to an asteroid 23 years ago by a human engineering team, simply stopped transmitting one morning. No warning, no error message. It had been running without maintenance for 17 years, and it had finally decided it was done. The Council's communication office logged the failure and sent a repair request to the Dorvani, who were the closest species with the technical clearance to handle deep space relay work. The Dorvani accepted the job without question. They were proud engineers. They had built some of the most complex structures in the galaxy. A small human relay box should have taken them a week at most. 3 weeks later, their lead technician sent back a report that used a great many careful words to say something very simple. They did not fully understand how it was built. The relay had layers inside it that the Dorvani had not expected. Not complicated layers, actually the opposite. They were simple, almost obvious in hindsight, but they were stacked in a way nobody else did. Each layer was a backup for the one before it. If one thing failed, the next thing caught it. If the next thing failed, the thing after that caught it. It was the reason the relay had kept running for 17 years without a single person checking on it. The Dorvani engineers, trained to build things with precision and minimal redundancy, kept looking for the complex part. There wasn't one, and somehow that made it harder, not easier, to fix. Ambassador Deho read the report in his office and set it down with the careful stillness of someone who does not want to show that something has bothered them. He called a subcommittee meeting. The Dorvani sent their best engineers. The Noval sent 2 systems analysts. The meeting lasted 4 hours and ended with a plan that everyone agreed was workable, though nobody was entirely sure how long it would take. The relay stayed dark. Meanwhile, a Velcorian colony ship attempting a routine long-range jump in the Outer Rim got into serious trouble. The jump gate it was using had been running on a calibration protocol written by a human engineer named Taiho, a long, careful piece of code that had been keeping the gate's targeting accurate for over 20 years. The protocol had a built-in update cycle. The update cycle had expired. Nobody had sent a new one because nobody had known they were supposed to. Taiho had moved on from council infrastructure work a long time ago, and whoever was meant to take over his maintenance schedule had simply never been assigned. The colony ship exited its jump 200,000 kilometers off course. It was deep in an unmapped region with no nearby stations and limited fuel reserves. The Council scrambled a rescue mission immediately. It took 6 days to reach them. In that time, the ship's crew rationed food, kept the passengers calm, and waited. Nobody was seriously hurt, but the 6 days felt very long. It was around this time that Soha stopped sleeping well. She had expanded her infrastructure report into something much larger. She had been working on it quietly, in her own time, pulling records from the Council archive, one thread at a time. What had started as a single number, 342 systems, had grown into something that covered most of her office wall. Charts, timelines, dependency maps. It looked, she thought late one night, like a map of roots under a tree. You couldn't see them from above. You only found them when things started dying. She brought the expanded report to Deho on a Tuesday morning. She did not tell him in advance what it contained. She simply set it in front of him and stood quietly while he read. He read for a long time. "How many people have seen this?" he asked. "Just me," she said. "And now, you." He nodded slowly. He turned a page, then another. The colony ship incident had its own section. The relay failure had its own section. There were 14 other sections. Not all of them had incidents yet. But the word "yet" was doing a lot of work in Soa's mind these days. "Humans built all of this?" Daiho said. It was not quite a question. "Built it, wrote it, or maintained it," Soa said. "In most cases, all three. Some of it goes back 40 years. Some of it is more recent. Almost none of it was formally documented as a human contribution. It was just listed as Council infrastructure." Deho closed the report. He looked at the wall behind her for a moment. "That was their choice," he said. "They chose not to document it." "I don't think it was a choice," Soa said carefully. "I think they documented it plenty. I think nobody thought it was important enough to file properly, so it kept getting miscategorized. For decades." Deho had nothing to say to that. On the other side of the galaxy, a border skirmish between the Theris Fringe Fleet and a Velkorian patrol unit broke into open fire. It was a small conflict. 4 ships on each side, 1 destroyed, 2 damaged, no civilian casualties. Under the old system, a human rapid response unit would have been on site within 18 hours. They carried mediators, translators, and enough firepower to make both sides reconsider their decisions without actually needing to use it. The skirmish would have been over before it became a skirmish. Instead, the Council's Peacekeeping Committee held 2 emergency sessions, exchanged 14 formal diplomatic messages with both parties, and brokered a ceasefire on the 6th day. The ceasefire was badly written. Both sides agreed to it because they were tired, not because either one was satisfied. The Theros general, a broad-shouldered veteran named Koru, stood on his ship's bridge afterward and looked out at the damage with a flat expression. His aide, a young woman named Hana, stood nearby, reviewing the ceasefire terms on her pad. "This won't hold," Koru said. Hana did not disagree. The Council's response time was poor. It wasn't just the time. Koru moved to the wide front window. "They sent the wrong kind of people. Administrators, paper signers." He was quiet for a moment. "The humans would have sent someone who knew how to stand in a room with us and not flinch." Hana looked up from her pad. "Should I file a formal complaint with the Council?" Koru shook his head. "No. File it under noted and leave it there." He turned away from the window. "Where are the humans anyway?" Hana had no answer. She had never needed to know before. The archive room on Orion Station was not a place most ambassadors visited. It was deep in the station's lower levels, past the maintenance corridors and the water recycling systems, in a part of the building that smelled faintly of old air and older paper. The Council stored its complete historical record here, not the polished public versions, but the actual records. Meeting minutes, internal reports, maintenance logs, staffing rosters going back 2 centuries. Soa had been spending a lot of time here. She had brought a Dorvani researcher named Vrail with her. Partly because Vrail had archive access she didn't, and partly because Vrail had a precise, organized mind that was good at finding patterns in large amounts of information. Daiho had authorized the full audit after reading Soa's expanded report. He had not told anyone else on the Council what they were looking for. Not yet. They worked in silence most of the time. The archive room was quiet and cool, and their screens cast pale blue light across stacks of old data units. Vrail sorted. Soha read. Slowly, over days that blurred together, the picture became complete. The military records came first. Humans had never held a formal seat on the Council's Defense Committee. They had been invited twice and declined both times, citing scheduling conflicts that may or may not have been real. But for over 150 years, human rapid response units had answered more emergency calls than any other species' military forces combined. They did not fight large wars. They did not conquer territory. They showed up fast at the places where things were about to go very wrong, and they made them go less wrong. They did this without orders, often without formal authorization, because by the time authorization came through, the window for stopping a conflict had usually already closed. Soha found a report from 60 years ago, written by a Theris general, that described a human response unit arriving at a disputed mining colony 2 hours before a full civil war was scheduled to start. The unit had 12 people. They had brought food, a medical kit, and a portable translation system. They had spent 36 hours talking to both sides. The war did not happen. The general's report called it unexpectedly effective. He did not elaborate. The medical files took longer to go through. Human-designed nanite protocols had been licensed to 31 species across the Council. The licensing was cheap, almost free in galactic economic terms. The protocols covered everything from routine cellular repair to emergency trauma response. They were elegant pieces of work, built to run quietly and self-correct without much outside intervention. A Dorvani medical researcher at the time had reportedly called them overly simple, which everyone who had read the same files now understood to be one of the least accurate assessments in Council history. The protocols had a maintenance cycle. The cycle required periodic updates from the original design team. The updates had not come in 17 years. In most cases, the protocols were still running. But Vrail, looking carefully at the degradation curves, he made a note and passed it to Soha without comment. The note said, "Some of these are close to threshold." The mediation records were perhaps the most striking of all. For a long time, humans had been the galaxy's quiet fixers. When two species couldn't agree on a trade boundary, a human diplomat was often in the room before the official mediator arrived. When a cultural misunderstanding between two council members threatened to become something uglier, a human cultural liaison had usually already made 3 informal visits and sent 6 carefully worded letters. None of this had ever appeared on the Council's official mediation record because humans had not filed it there. They had filed it in their own internal records, which were now 17 years out of date and sitting in a closed archive on a world that did not receive Council correspondence. Vrail looked up from her screen late on the 4th day. "They did all of this," she said, "and held 0 seats of real authority." "1 seat," Soha corrected. "They had the 1 regular seat, but the major committees, defense, trade, resource allocation, infrastructure planning, humans were never given permanent positions on any of them." Vrail was quiet for a moment. "Why not?" Soha thought about how to answer that. "From what I can find," she said slowly, "it was never a formal decision. Nobody voted to exclude them. They just kept getting passed over. There was always a reason, and they were too new, then they were too informal, then they hadn't been active members long enough, then the committee was already full. And the whole time they were doing the work anyway." Vrail turned back to her screen. "Until they stopped." "Until they stopped," Soha agreed. She had found the personal log on the 3rd day, but had not told Vrail about it yet. It was recorded by a man named Junho, the last human representative to the Council. A quiet-looking man with gray at his temples and a very steady voice. The log was dated the night before the human delegation left Orion Station for the last time. He had not been angry. That was the thing Soha kept coming back to. He had not been dramatic or bitter or even particularly sad. He had spoken the way someone speaks when they have made a decision they have thought about for a very long time. He said that humanity had asked in various ways and in various rooms for genuine partnership, not favors, not awards, just to be treated as equals by the people they had spent generations helping. He said the asking had grown tiring. He said there were other things to build and other ways to spend a life. He said, and this was the part Soha had replayed several times, that the galaxy was very large, and humanity had only ever seen a small part of it because they kept being busy with everyone else's problems. He wished the council well. He meant it. Then the recording ended. Soa sat in the archive room long after Vrail had gone to sleep, with the log playing on her small screen in the dim blue light, and thought about the empty chair at the big table. She thought about how easily the vote had passed. She thought about the maintenance cycles ticking down, and the relay still dark in Sector 7, and the colony ship that had drifted 200,000 kilometers off course because one piece of careful old code had finally run out of time. She thought about what Junho had said, that there were other things to build. She wondered what they had built. Nobody planned for everything to break at once. That was the thing Daiho would come back to later in the long months that followed, the fact that it was not an attack. There was no enemy. No weapon had been fired at the council. No signal had been sent. It was simply the galaxy doing what it does, which is continue without asking anyone's permission, and 17 years of borrowed time finally running out. It started on a Tuesday. Most bad things in Daiho's experience started on a Tuesday. The first report came from the Dorvani colony world of Harvin. Their medical system flagged a sudden spike in neurological cases in one of the larger settlements. The cases were spreading fast, not like a standard infection, but like something that had been held in check for a long time and was now, slowly, getting through. The settlement's medical AI ran its diagnostics and identified the problem within hours. The human-designed nanite protocol that had been quietly managing a dormant neurological pathogen in the colony's water systems for 30 years had finally degraded past its functional threshold. The nanites were no longer suppressing the pathogen. The pathogen was waking up. The Dorvani's own medical systems were advanced. They were, by most measures, the best in the galaxy at structural biological engineering. But the nanite protocol was not their architecture. They had been running it for 30 years without ever fully understanding how it worked, the same way a person can live in a house for 30 years without knowing where the pipes are. Dr. Nari, the colony's chief medical officer, requested the original human design files immediately. The files existed. They were in an archive. But the person who could read them, update them, and push a repair sequence through them was not a Dorvani. There was nobody on Harvin or on any Dorvani world who could fix what they had not built. Within 4 days, 11,000 people were showing symptoms. The second report came from the Jump Gate network. 3 gates in the mid-rim, gates 7, 14, and 19, failed in a cascade over the course of 48 hours. They had all been running on the same outdated calibration framework that had stranded the colony ship weeks before. The council had issued a repair advisory after that incident, but the advisory had moved through the standard committee process, which was slow, and the gates had not waited for the committee. A Velkorian civilian convoy, 14 ships carrying over 9,000 people, including families, children, workers, had been in mid-jump when Gate 14 failed. They came out of the jump in an empty sector with no stations, no relay coverage, and 3 weeks of supplies. The Council's fastest rescue timeline was 11 weeks. The third thing was the war. The Theris-Velkorian ceasefire, the badly written one, broke on a Wednesday. A Theris patrol fired on a Velkorian survey drone near a disputed moon. The Velkorians responded. Within 72 hours, it had escalated from a skirmish into something with a name, the kind of conflict that gets recorded in history books. The Council's peacekeeping force mobilized, but they were slow and rigid, and deeply unfamiliar with the way Theros commanders thought. Theros' military strategy was psychological as much as tactical. They pressured, probed, retreated, pressured again, reading their opponents the way a person reads a face. The Council's forces did not know how to be read that way. They kept responding to the wrong moves. Cities on a Velkorian colony world began burning on day 4. On the Council floor, the emergency session was the loudest in living memory. Daiho stood at the podium and waited for the shouting to stop. It took a long time. When it finally did, he opened the report. The full audit, the one Soa had built over weeks in the archive room, and he read from it. Not the summary. The actual numbers, the actual names, the actual systems, protocols, response records, and maintenance logs that the Council had been running on for 17 years without knowing where they came from. He read for a long time. The chamber stayed quiet. He did not blame any one species. He did not make accusations. He spoke plainly because the plainness was worse than any accusation. He said that 3 crises were currently burning across the galaxy, and that in each of them the Council was slow, confused, or simply unable to help. He said that if any one of those crises had occurred 15 years ago, there would have been human teams on site before the Council had finished its first committee meeting. He said that nobody had taken that from them. They had simply stopped offering it. And the reason they had stopped offering it, he said, was sitting in this room. And it had been sitting in this room for a very long time. He closed the report. The vote to formally request human re-engagement passed with 44 in favor, 2 abstentions, and no dissents. It was the first unanimous adjacent vote on a major issue in 11 years. The message was written, approved, and broadcast on every council frequency within the hour. It went out into the dark. From the gallery above the chamber floor, Soha watched it all. She thought about the maintenance logs. She thought about the ceasefire that didn't hold. She thought about Junho's voice, calm and quiet, saying there were better things to do with a life. The broadcast went out. The stars did not answer. 6 weeks passed. The Council's rescue fleet was still 8 weeks out from the stranded convoy. The Dorvani medical team on Harvin had slowed the pathogen's spread using older methods, but slowly and at great cost. The Theris-Velkorian War had settled into a grim, grinding exchange that neither side was winning, and neither side knew how to stop. The Council sent more diplomats. They sent the wrong kind. Then, on a quiet morning with no prior notice, a single ship appeared near the stranded convoy. It was a cargo freighter, old hull, clean engine signature. It did not identify itself to the Council rescue fleet. It did not answer hails for the first 2 hours. It simply moved alongside the lead civilian ship, matched velocity, and docked. Inside, Yuna walked through the convoy's situation in 4 hours. She talked to the convoy's chief engineer, looked at their fuel reserves, checked their life support margins, and ran 3 calculations on her navigation console that the fleet's lead commander had not thought to try. She sent 2 messages, not to the Council, but to 2 other independent human ships operating in the same region. They arrived within 18 hours. 72 hours after Yuna had first docked, all 14 convoy ships were moving. They had been guided through a jump solution that used 3 smaller, shorter hops instead of 1 long-range gate. An approach that required precise timing and a level of navigational confidence that the fleet's own pilots had not considered possible in the current conditions. It was not impossible. It just required a certain kind of thinking. Yuna's ship detached and headed out before the fleet commander could formally reach her on comms. When he finally got through, she was already a significant distance away. He thanked her. She said it was fine. She told him the convoy's lead pilot now had the calculation files and could handle the remaining hops without assistance. Then she closed the channel. On Harvin, the human ships arrived without announcement. They carried updated nanite protocols on secure data drives. There were 4 ships crewed by a mix of engineers and medical technicians, and they worked in rotating shifts for 9 days straight. They did not hold a press event. They did not speak to the Council's medical committee. They asked Dr. Nari for full access to the colony's medical systems, explained what they were going to do in clear and simple terms, and then did it. When it was finished, Nari tried to ask questions about the protocol architecture because she wanted to understand it for next time. The lead technician, a calm young man named Doyen, sat with her for 2 hours and went through everything. He gave her the full documentation. He told her who to contact if there were problems. Then his team packed up and left. The war was different. The war required a different kind of person. Mira arrived at the war table on a Thursday. She was not old. She was not imposing in the way that people expect a diplomat to be imposing. She was average height, wore plain clothes, and moved through the room with the unhurried ease of someone who is not trying to impress anyone. She was not there on behalf of the Council. She had not been invited by either side. She sat down at the table, introduced herself by name only, and placed a single-bound document in front of each party. Koru, the Theris general, looked at the document. Then he looked at her. "Who sent you?" "Nobody sent me," Mira said. "I came because this is my area." He studied her for a moment. Theris commanders were trained to read people, their tension, their confidence. the small signs that told you whether someone was performing strength or actually had it. He read Mira carefully. Then he opened the document. It was a ceasefire architecture. It was 22 pages long and covered every point of contention between the two parties: territorial boundaries, resource rights, patrol limits, a 5-stage dispute resolution process for future conflicts. It was precise. It accounted for Theros' cultural expectations around honor and face-saving in a way that no council diplomat had ever managed. It accounted for Velkorian economic anxieties with equal care. It was, in the estimation of both sides' senior advisors, the best constructed ceasefire document either of them had ever seen. Both generals signed it before the end of the day. Mira folded her copy of the document and put it in her bag. She did not stay for the formal ceremony. She had a transport to catch. Orion Station had seen many arrivals in its long history: ambassadors from new species, emergency delegations during crises, historic summits. But the arrival of Mira on a plain civilian shuttle, with no entourage, no formal notice, and no press, was something the station's arrival logs would later categorize simply as unscheduled visitor. She walked into the council chamber unannounced, which was technically against procedure. The security staff at the door had hesitated because she had not been hostile, had not raised her voice, and had presented a credential type none of them had seen before. While they were still working out what to do, she was already inside. The council was in session. The speaker called for order. Mira walked to the center of the floor, not to the empty human seat, not to any seat, but to the open speaker's position that was traditionally reserved for formal addresses, and stopped. The chamber was very quiet. She was not there to rejoin the council. She said that clearly at the start, so there would be no confusion. Humanity had spent 17 years building something of their own, she said. A network, an alliance, a way of operating in the galaxy that did not require anyone's permission or approval. It was called the Null Compact. It was not a government in the way the council understood governments. It was a framework for cooperation between human communities and interests across dozens of systems, built quietly over years by people who had decided they had better things to do than wait for a seat at a table that kept moving. The compact was not the council's enemy. It had no interest in being anyone's enemy, but it was also not the council's tool, and it would never again be anyone's invisible support structure. She placed the terms on the table. There were 3 pages. They were clear and simple, because humans, she said, had learned long ago that clear and simple things were harder to misread than complicated ones. The Null Compact would engage with the Galaxy Council as an external sovereign partner, equal standing, mutual respect. Full and formal acknowledgement of any dependency or service arrangement. No more invisible maintenance. No more uncredited infrastructure. Humans would retain the right to accept or decline any request. Assistance would be offered when humans chose to offer it, on agreed terms, not as an assumed default. In return, the compact would make its technical expertise, medical protocols, and mediation services available through a formal licensing and partnership process that any council member could access. The council could accept these terms, negotiate them, or decline them. All 3 were valid choices, but there would be no return to the old arrangement. That door, she said, was closed from the inside. The chamber was silent for a long moment after she finished. Then Daiho stood up. He was older than he had been at the start of all this. It had only been a few months. But he felt it. He stood and he looked at Mira across the chamber floor, and he said, clearly and on the formal record, that the Velkorian delegation acknowledged the terms and supported opening negotiations under the framework she had described. He said that the council owed a debt that could not be easily quantified. He did not use the word apology because he was not sure it was enough to be useful. He said instead that the council was ready to do the work of becoming the kind of body that deserved the partnership it was being offered. 3 other delegations stood within the minute. Then more. Then more. Mira watched it without expression. She nodded once. She said the compact's formal representatives would be in touch with a negotiating timeline, and that in the meantime she hoped the council's current crises were manageable. She did not smile. She did not need to. From the gallery above, Soa watched Mira walk out of the chamber. She thought about the log, about Junho's quiet voice, and the way he had said there were better things to build. She thought about Yuna, somewhere out in the dark, rerouting without filing a report. She thought about Doyun sitting with Dr. Nari for 2 hours after the work was done, making sure she understood everything, giving her all the documentation, and then leaving without asking for anything. She thought about the number 342, which had started all of this. She looked at the empty chair below, still sitting where it had always sat, still plain and undecorated. It had not been Mira's chair. Mira had not wanted it. Nobody had asked to give it back, and nobody had taken it. It would probably sit there for a long time because that was what empty chairs did. But the table, Soa thought, felt different now. Not smaller, not larger, just honest. In a way it had not been before. Outside the station's windows, the stars were the same as they had always been, very far apart, very patient, entirely indifferent to the small, important arguments of the people moving between them. Somewhere out among them, a freighter with old engines and careful eyes was already on to the next job. No report filed, no channel open, just moving, quiet and steady, through the dark. Humanity had not come back to ask for anything. They had come back because some things needed fixing, and they were good at fixing things. They had handed the galaxy a bill written in plain language, shaken no fists, and gone back to work. It would take the Council a long time to understand that this was not generosity, it was just who humans were.